So, welcome back everyone. After all the preparation stuff, now we come to the core element of the training. We're approaching the discussion on how to organize and structure the training day itself. So basically what we're doing in this video is we want to consider what is a training choreography besides the training structure. How can we plan the choreography and how can we orchestrate it during the training to manage and control the dynamics that we probably want to control by ourselves. So first of all, let's consider some terminology. So typically what we have when we create or plan a training, we are approaching the planning situation from a structural perspective. So we have some content that we want to present, and so we are approaching a structure similar like the one that we can see here. Maybe we decide if we choose an inductive or a deductive approach, but basically we are trying to structure the content in respect to the available time slots that we have. Besides the training structure, there is a second aspect which needs to be mentioned. Same thing in on-site trainings, which is the choreography. So typically we have a different pace during the training, and this on the one hand is triggered by the situation that we have, like probably right after lunch we have a different pace than just in the morning. But this is something that at least we should plan to a certain degree, because this is the heartbeat that controls the whole training situation. In on-site trainings, you somehow can control this by reacting to the participants. You have more flexibility, but in a remote setting, this requires a little bit more effort and a little bit more consideration how you really can control it. Because for all the activation elements, you have to prepare something in advance. You cannot use some games like everybody get up and run around and stuff like that. So the consideration on the dynamics requires some more preparation from our side. That's the choreography, that's the plan. And in the end, during the training situation, we have to maintain the orchestration, which means we are acting. The obvious things here are the timekeeping, of course, but there is also the aspect of how to control the dynamics, like to increase the pace a bit or to decrease, slow down, and everything else. So this is what we generally call moderation. I prefer to call it to lead the training, to control the whole training situation in order to deliver some good results. Okay, so that's the basics. And now let's take a look how this looks like in a typical training day. So on the one hand, we have all of the well-known structural elements, like we are starting with a welcome coffee, we have some participants introduction in the beginning, we provide a framing to set the baseline, then all the different training blocks are coming, separated by different coffee breaks and the lunch break, and in the end we make the closing and reflection part. Nothing new so far. That's the structural perspective. If we try to allocate it to a functional or dynamic perspective, then we can identify different phases, like a warm-up activation phase in the beginning, which basically sets the initial pace. Then we can deliver the first training content. So we have some individual training block choreography here. Very important point, after lunch break, always we have some anti-fatigue action, because everybody is a little bit sleepy after lunch, so we need to activate them again before we can proceed with working on content, which is done subsequently. And then in the end, we make our safe landing. We love to have a cool down phase, which typically comprises things like a summary, individual reflection, and maybe some the clarification of some takeaways from all the participants in the training. So what we're going to do now is we want to take a look at all these aspects and see how we can control the dynamics and how we can plan the choreography. So let's start right in the morning. So typically we have the welcome coffee in the on-site setting, and my suggestion here is that you also involve something like that in the remote setting. So what I prefer to do is when the training starts at, I don't know, 9 o'clock, then I'm opening the call at latest 8:40, so 20 minutes earlier, and I'm inviting the participants in the chat to join me for a coffee. So you can mention all the names, or you can mention the whole name of the channel that you're in, which basically triggers a message that the participants will receive directly. So they have the chance to enter the call early, to have a chat on with a coffee, and maybe to also fix some remaining technical problems. What I also like to do in such phases before the training or also during the coffee breaks is it's a trick that I would small trick that I would like to share. I'm using a countdown timer, which basically we have plenty of tools that exist. I'm using something that is called, I think, the countdown tile, but you also have some onboard tools, for example, in Windows, and I guess Linux or Mac will have something similar as well. So I'm using different tools that I can use to configure a countdown timer. And then I created a scene in OBS, one scene that only shows the countdown timer so people know when the session will start again. And in the morning, when I realize that people already come, they join me for a coffee, then I have a second scene which which visualizes myself and also the remaining time until the training starts. So for the participants, it looks in something like this one. So this is the screen that we see during a coffee break or a lunch break. So everyone that comes back already knows when the training will start again. And when I realize that people already come back to the training, or in the morning they join early, then I'm switching to a different scene like this. So this is a good thing where we can have a brief chat, can have a discussion, and we still see the countdown. So everybody clearly sees when the training will start and they can prepare themselves in that way. So that's just a minor trick, but I figured out that this one is quite valuable for the participants to see at which time we exactly do start again. Okay, so welcome coffee is done. We had a good laugh. Everything is going well. And now we're starting the training. And typically on the first training day, we make the introduction round. And as I mentioned earlier in the last video, this can be time consuming depending on the audience, because some people, they just want to tell everything. And this already right in the beginning can bring us out of the agenda. So on the one hand, we need to be polite. On the other hand, we need to do the time management. So what I found very valuable here is the working with the participant introduction mural that we have seen in the last video as well. So I'm starting here in the beginning session, I'm starting the mural. And I also use the opportunity here to again show them where they find the show notes, how to open the mural. Maybe I show them some additional tips, like to rearrange the sticky notes, to change the shape, the color. So it's just a little introduction to the tool as well. And by having such a mural with the pictures of all the participants, their background and expectations, provides me with the opportunity to not ask open questions with the risk of exceeding every time limit, but to moderate the introduction with closed questions by addressing the points that the participants have managed. So this is it's a small trick, but it's very valuable to maintain the time management in the initial phase. And you can imagine if you have, I don't know, 12 participants and everyone takes 3 minutes, then you already spend a lot of time in the first session only with talking about participants. Okay, so that's the introduction part. And the next aspect, after we know each other, everybody was able to say something. So that's another aspect here. We want everyone to at least speak once. That is a classic icebreaker like in the on-site sessions. And when this is done, then we want to provide the frame for the rest of the training. So the next step is coming, which is called the framing. And typically in the normal training, we have a few introduction words, and then we are elaborating together with the participants an agenda, like a big picture. And this agenda then remains visible to the participants for the whole training day. So wherever we are, they just can take a look to the wall and they will see the agenda and get an idea of how much topics are open yet, what did we already cover. So it's a good frame. In a remote setting, obviously we don't have the chance to put a flip chart at the wall, or we have, but nobody would see it. So we need to find some different concept to establish the frame. And what is helpful here is if you understand that there is not a chance to have something visible during the whole day, then you have to make it memorizable. So it's a good idea to work with a key visual here that provides a frame. So I always try right in the beginning of a training to develop a key visual, which we see very often during the day. And such a key visual typically comprises different blocks, and all these blocks, they stay in a relation together, so they are somehow the storyline that guides us through the training. And it's a memorizable concept that helps the people to understand where we are. So it gives them a kind of overview. This is something that I find particularly useful. The challenge here, of course, is that it's not a good idea to just present such a key visual, but rather to elaborate it together with participants. So if you build up this picture together, then it's more easy for them to remember it and to understand where we are at the moment. So that's the framing situation. Yeah, and right after the framing situation, the framing element, we can really jump into the delivery of the training. So which means that we are doing the whole training with all the individual training blocks that we have. And for all these training blocks, we have a different choreography to be considered, because of course we have to deal with some constraints. So a typical constraint is the time constraint, which basically means that your blocks are probably, depending on the content, they have a length of 60 to 19 minutes. I personally made good experiences with 19 minutes. I didn't think in the beginning this will work out, but by integrating activation and exercises, I learned that 90 minutes is absolutely feasible. So the time constraint is the one thing. And the second thing is that we have constraints from the overall concept. Like, for example, in the first block, we have some time to consider for the warm-up and introduction. After lunch, we have some anti-fatigue action, which consumes time. And of course, in the end, we need to leave some frame for the cool down phase, or the safe landing, as I call it. So what helps us here is, again, in every block to provide structure again, similar as we did for the whole training, and to show clear bridges between the individual topics of the block. So I prefer to structure my blocks in something that is called a learning nugget, which is a concept that is known from remote teaching from academia, where basically you try to separate all the content in elements which consume about 5 to 10 minutes. So we have a clear structure between all the different topics. And to give you an example here, this is taken from one training that I have. It's called software engineering. And here we have the overview of all the blocks. It's a 2 or 3 day training, depending on the audience. And for every block, I try again to identify a key visual, something like, for example, here it's requirements engineering, where you clearly can see, okay, and these are all the individual learning nuggets that are addressed separately. And the bridge between is the overall process of requirements engineering in that case. So I only can say here, in a remote setting where we don't have the frame pinned to the wall, structure wins, especially in training situations that last over the whole day, because this is a present risk to lose orientation for the participants. So structure wins, and with structure wins, I mean the presentation of the structure of the topics that we are addressing in such a training. Okay, so now we have seen the individual blocks and how to structure them. And let's take a closer look now how to organize the individual training blocks something like 90 minutes. So let's consider some basics first. So a golden rule is that the theory part, which means something where the trainer is talking, should not exceed 20 minutes. So if you really have the whole training day, so if people are involved in the training for the whole day, then all the theory parts should really be limited to maximum of 20 minutes. It's better if you restrict yourself to 10 to 15 minutes. And after that time, you always should integrate some activation element, be it a moderated discussion, be it a drawing, an example, maybe you make a mini exercise, a questionnaire, a waterfall chat, or all the different elements that we've already seen in the previous videos. So let's take a look how this one could look like. So first of all, let's assume we have such a block and it is planned for 19 minutes. And let's say it's the block right after lunch. Then typically we have the constraint that we want to start with an activation exercise or with a real exercise, which could be something like 45 minutes. So you make a 30-minute group exercise with 2 or 3 different exercise groups. You plan 15 minutes for the resolution, and then half of the block is already gone with activity conducted by the participants. And after that exercise, typically they should be awake again, so digestion is starting and stuff, and they are back, and they are prepared to get some content. And then we can arrange some learning nuggets. As we already spent half the time in exercises, there is only place for around 3 nuggets, depending on the size. And what I do next is I put an overlay on that to consider where to bring in activation elements. So I'm considering activation elements rather from the time perspective than from the content perspective. And that's at least the plan how to construct such an individual learning block. But in the end, we all know that plans are just plans. So what I always do is I'm planning flexibility. So at least I know that I have to bring activation at different points in time, but I'm preparing different types of activation. So which means in the end, in the training, I never show everything that I prepared. I make a choice depending on the audience. And typically, I have a separation in 2 paths. The one path is if my group is very discussion intense, so they like to talk and contribute and everything which is pretty normally good, then here we have the risk that all these activations exceed the time frame. So if the group is active by themselves, I try to involve activities which are rather trainer related, something like I'm developing a drawing, I'm presenting an example, make use of storytelling. So things which bring me in the role of the time owner. On the other hand, if my group is rather passive, or if it's from a cultural region where people do not like to talk so much on their own, then I'm preferring to use activities which is participant oriented. So I'm using typically mini exercises, I'm integrating different questionnaires, waterfall chats and stuff like that. So my hint at that point is to really prepare different options so that during the training you have the choice to select. And here you already see one of the main challenges in such a remote training, because on the one hand, we need to have a very good plan because everything that we do needs to be prepared, elaborated in advance. But on the other hand, we want to be flexible enough to react to a particular group or to a particular situation. And this is basically the permanent trade-off that we are figuring here. But in the end, my feeling is if you have a certain set of training elements, then you can build up your own backlog, which gives you the necessary flexibility. Okay, so that's the delivery of the training blocks. Now we can conduct all the 4 training blocks that we typically have in the training. We can organize the breaks in between. We know how to deal with the breaks, like using the countdown timer, coming back early for a coffee and stuff like that. And then we're approaching the end of the training day. And here we make our safe landing, the cool down phase. And the cool down phase here typically is the same thing as we have in an on-site training. So we want to summarize everything, we want to reflect on it, make the participants articulate what they take away or what they are planning to do right after the training. And here my best practice, I'm sure there are other concepts as well, but my personal best practice here is to close the loop to the beginning and to come back with our initial big picture, like you remember from the framing. And so in the framing picture that we can use, I prefer to let participants make the statement. So in fact, it's a mural exercise again, where all the participants of the training can individually reflect on the individual topics or the individual blocks of such a training day. And they can take notes depending on what you like, either what I did like, which topic was valuable for me, or something that I always like to integrate is an aspect like, and that is my takeaway, and this is what I'm going to do. Because if the participants have the experience that they take a note, they write down what they want to do, and they pin it to the board, then it's a kind of an activation and a kind of a commitment. And so you have higher chances that people right after the training will stick to their commitment because they have been thinking about it, they have written down what they want to do, and they shared it with the rest of the group. So this is something that I typically always integrate the final exercise like, and this is what I do take away from this particular training. This is what I want to do in the next step. Yeah, and of course, if you have all the feedbacks, all the takeaways summarized in one picture, then this is a very fantastic picture to integrate in the protocol, which is delivered a few days or weeks later, so participants can remember it again. Yeah, and to summarize this whole block here, well, in the end, the main thing of importance, I think, is that a training is not only determined by its structure, which is driven by the content, but it's also determined by its dynamics. And in the remote setting, we need to be more mindful about how to control the dynamics than in the online setting, because we are less flexible. Every activity that we want to do needs to be planned and prepared. So not much room for spontaneous action. So my suggestion here is to plan the dynamics of the training, the different paces that you want to take on your journey, to plan that one with the same sobriety as you would use to elaborate the content. But in the end, as I mentioned before, we always have the trade-off here. On the one hand, we need to plan everything and prepare everything. On the other hand, we want to have a certain level of flexibility, which means in the end, as a trainer, you're challenged to prepare different options so that you have the flexibility to choose during the training which option you want to take. Yeah, and that's the basic way how to plan and execute some certain dynamics that you want to have, how to orchestrate it. I hope there were a few useful hints. Of course, if you're experienced, you may have your own pace. It may be depending on the topic, but at least I hope that you could find some inspiration and some valuable hints that maybe could help you to improve your trainings or to just get some new ideas. Okay, so this was phase 2, the execution of the training. And in the next video, we want to discuss and summarize or consider how we can deal with the post-processing, how we can use the post-processing phase of a training to really ensure that something happens after the training, which basically means people take action. So then, see you in the next video.